Good morning and welcome to our fourth Lent reflection for Saturday mornings here at Culwood. It would be lovely to have you here as a Lent group to talk about these things, but we'll look forward to that next year. Now, last Saturday we talked in our theme about we're all Pontius Pilate's brothers and sisters, about how and what happened when Pilate got to his posting in Jerusalem. And I developed a rather serious theme about how he, as a Roman, thought he was a member of a superior people. And of course, the Jews believed that they were the elect and the chosen ones, and they were a superior people. So there's this kind of dynamic, this engagement between Rome and the Jews, which was an uneasy peace. And it made me think, and I shared with you the idea of the dangers of how feeling like a superior people can lead to dreadful sort of colonial oppressions, and how all great empires really have fallen victim to that idea of superiority and their presumption that it is their right, it is their duty, it is their calling, it is their mission in life to impose themselves on other people. And that reminded us of the slave trade. It reminded us of our tenure in the Raj in India. I'm not saying that we should bear a huge burden of guilt for that today, but nevertheless we should own that history. And it was into this environment, of course, that Jesus of Nazareth entered. But I thought I'd just dwell this Saturday on the idea of the way in which Pontius Pilate endeavoured to impress upon the peoples around him that he governed, that he was in charge and that the Roman Empire was in charge, and the way in which he tried to impress the Emperor Tiberius back in Rome, and how it led to calamities for Pilate, which are recorded by Josephus in the history of the Roman people. So we know these stories to be true about Pilate as his time as a governor in Jerusalem. And we know that, of course, he felt a great burden of responsibility to impress the Emperor Tiberius back in Rome, the emperor who decided that he'd inflict a censor on Judea and everybody would have to return to their hometowns, which is why Mary and Joseph returned to Bethlehem, you'll recall. Tiberius was a man of whim and insecurity, and it's worth just dwelling perhaps on a little vignette that reveals what Tiberius is like. And this adds to the theme that I really want to develop this week, really, that very often the Roman Empire was a bit like Basil Fawlty. The Roman Empire was a bit like Fawlty Towers in the way that it responded. It was actually, in a sense, quite funny. Tiberius, when he was 68, was getting on a bit. I mean, it's no age at all these days, is it? But he was getting on a bit when he was 68. He was persuaded to go to Capri to take the air and to relax away from the debaucheries and stresses of Rome. And in this little paragraph from the book that we're using during Lent, Pilate, the Biography of an Invented Man, which I do commend to you, given to me by Arthur Kay. Thank you very much, Arthur, in 2017. When Tiberius got to Capri, there were the rugged cliffs of Capri and the deep blue sea entrancing him. Not least because access to Capri was so difficult, so security was very good there for Tiberius. And when a fisherman scrambled up the rocks behind him to present him with a fresh caught mullet, Tiberius was so terrified at this breach of security that he ordered the man's face to be scrubbed raw with the fish. When the man cried out, "Thank goodness I didn't give him the crab," Tiberius ordered him to be scrubbed with the crab as well. Charming man, Tiberius. But, in a sense, it's a comic scene, isn't it? Amongst all this pomposity and grandeur of the Roman Empire, there's almost sort of commedia dell'arte to scenes to develop the Italian idea of comedy, the Italian tradition of comedy. And Pilate is rather a hapless figure too, almost to the extent that his efforts to ingratiate himself with Rome are really quite comic. Now, Pilate had a palace in Caesarea on the Mediterranean coast, not far, 60 miles or something from Jerusalem. Judea is really not very big, and modern-day Israel and Palestine aren't very big, so it's easier to get between these places. And rather like Capri, Pilate in this other story had a sense of security in Caesarea, and it was a sort of spiritual security as much as anything else. And I just want to read you the story of Pilate and the Roman standards, that is, the Roman standard bearing the image of the Emperor Tiberius, and how important those were to the Romans. They carried them into battle, they took them to their stations of empire around the place, such as Judea, and they were a symbol of the emperor's holy power, his God-given powers wherever the Roman Empire spread. Pilate was anxious, obviously, to ingratiate himself with Tiberius and have the Roman standards of Tiberius flying. Let me read you this story of Pilate and the standards. Pilate's sense of security in Caesarea depended not merely on the armour and number of his men, but also on the gleaming spiritual barrier provided by the standards. He needed their protection even more on his rare visits to Jerusalem. But his predecessors had agreed that the fully decorated standards would never be taken there into the city sacred to the Jews. Instead, they were dismantled and the images left in the guard room at Caesarea, among the extra blankets and the broken swords. Jerusalem was thus the only city in the empire where the people did not bow down in public squares to the image of the emperor. Indeed, it was the only city where they had no glimpses of imperial paraphernalia at all. You have to remember that it was very important to the Jews that they bore no graven images, no icons, no idols to other gods. And of course, Roman emperors were considered by the Romans to be gods and the peoples that they subjugated. The moment Pilate arrived in Judea, according to Josephus, he decided on a different policy. The next time the troops were ordered to Jerusalem for garrison duty, they would not dismantle the standards, but would take them, fully accoutred, under cover of darkness, to Jerusalem. Still in the dark, they would fix them to the walls of the Antonia fortress. If Pilate was thinking tactically at this point, rather than vengefully or emotionally, he might have reasoned that the fortress was not a holy part of the city. It already had Romans in it, so it wasn't going to cause a lot of trouble. He was simply planting Rome standards in a Rome-occupied place, as any conquering general would. Then, when the Jews woke up, the beauty and power of the emperor's authority would hit them in the face. The first rays of the morning sun would gild his profile all along the battlements. "Tiberius! Tiberius! Tiberius!" they would shout. Josephus, in his Antiquities, suggests that this was part of a larger, more outrageous plan to move the army to winter quarters in Jerusalem to abolish the laws of the Jews. That's what he said. But it would have been odd to move the troops in winter to a colder, snowier place, and Josephus, in his earlier work, The Jewish War, doesn't mention any such motive on the part of Pontius Pilate. Instead, the aim of the standards policy seems to have been much simpler: to show the Jews who is in charge at the start of Pilate's term as governor. He didn't, after all, parade the standards flagrantly through the streets by day. He had enough sensitivity, just, to do it in the dark. Abolishing the laws of the Jews was nowhere in the brief, or even a foolishly headstrong governor of Judea wouldn't think that. In any case, the new standards policy had only one airing. Some days after the garrison had gone to Jerusalem, Pilate awoke to find a huge crowd of Jews outside his palace. Now this is in Caesarea at the coast. Now this is recorded. This is a true story. They were right below the walls, under the windows. Most had plainly walked the 60 miles from Jerusalem. Some had their feet bound with rags. Many, since it was almost winter, were bundled in cloaks and overcoats. The crowd seethed with noise, or perhaps more unnervingly, with silence. And it stretched as far as he could see, the crowd. According to Josephus, the Jews petitioned him for days to take the standards down. For most of the time, they did so with ritual swaying and incantations, praying that his soul would be softened and that he would see sense. You see, the Jews were terribly upset that this graven image of the emperor, a god in Roman terms, had been set up around a palace in Jerusalem, because it offended their God. It was against the law of Moses, one of the 10 commandments. You shall take unto yourself no graven image. Josephus suggests that they also negotiated with Pilate directly, but perhaps they didn't get too close. Pilate would have suffered them to approach and salute him with the usual deep bow of subject people. But in the eyes of the Roman governor, though freshly bathed daily and scraped with the full sense and magnetism of his authority, this was impurity itself to be presented with common people, from which they wished to keep their distance. They therefore couldn't really negotiate. They were in effect two religions colliding, two notions of the sacred that could not be reconciled. Again and again the Jews pleaded with him, "Please, sir, remove the standards. They offend us and they offend the laws of our ancestors. Please remove them." "No. Your predecessors didn't offend against our laws. They respected them. Please remove the standards, sir." "No." "Will you tell us why you will not remove them, sir?" "Because it would be an insult to the emperor," Pilate answered, "and I will not insult him." The Jews stayed for days, being insulted. Their God was insulted. On each day for hours they petitioned him. He refused to budge, and so did they. Pilate seemed too surprised to ask his troops to clear them. He went about his duties. Then, on the 6th day, he forced a confrontation in the great stadium. He let himself get to the point of killing them because they wouldn't leave. His soldiers had their swords drawn and at the Jews' throats. Then, as they showed themselves quite indifferent to death, Jesus wasn't the first Jew to be put in front of Pilate who showed complete indifference to death. When they showed themselves to be quite indifferent to death, he was so shocked that he backed down. Their invisible God was stronger than his, whose image surrounded him. The order was given for the standards to be taken out of Jerusalem, and Pilate retreated to his palace. What a U-turn. It was his first defeat, and perhaps the hardest to take. Not only the emperor's honour had been at stake, but his own ability to keep order and impress Roman ways on his province. His humiliation so impressed and delighted the Jews that they appointed a new feast day, the 3rd of Kislev, that's the festival, one of their festivals, to commemorate the day, quote, when the standards were taken away from the pavement of the temple, unquote. The fact that Pilate removed them without apparent clearance from Rome suggests that the whole affair was his idea from the beginning and that he had only himself to blame for the debacle that resulted. The honour of Tiberius in this small symbolic case was not worth a massacre of the Jews, and Tiberius himself would have been the first to point that out to him. And so he returned, smarting, to his quasi-Roman chambers by the sea at Caesarea. Well, there you have the story of the Roman standards and Pontius Pilate and how he screwed up. There he is, looking over my shoulder. Look, again this week, Pontius Pilate, keeping an eye on me from behind. And he was trying to keep an eye on himself by ingratiating himself with Tiberius, of course. Word did get to Tiberius because he made another cock-up, if I can put it that way. Excuse my French, excuse my Latin. Pilate, took golden shields as symbols into Jerusalem. And again, these were considered to be idolatrous by the Jews. And again, he got into awful trouble by displaying these golden shields to the Jews. He also struck his own coin with a picture of the emperor on it for distribution as a currency in Jerusalem. And that gives extra poignancy to that story about Jesus being handed the coin and asked, to whom do we pay our taxes? Because it had an image of the emperor on it. Again, you see, remember, that wasn't just about loyalty to Rome or loyalty to the temple. This was, or loyalty therefore to God, but also this was about graven images, like even a coin was a graven image. So word did get back to Tiberius about the terrible pickles that Pilate got into. And Pilate in the end was recalled to Rome by Tiberius. And this usually meant only one thing. The emperor recalled you to Rome if you'd made a cock-up, and you'd frankly be executed. Now, Pilate lucked in because he travelled back to Rome, reckoning that this what was waiting for him there. And he was only about a day from Rome when word got to him that Tiberius had died. So Pilate got away with it. That's recorded in Roman history too. So Pilate lucked in from time to time. But the main thing about Pilate was that he was trying to please Rome, and sometimes not trying to please the Jews at all. Later on in the story of Jesus before him, of course, he was trying to strike a balance between what the Jews want and what the local law was, and whose responsibility, Jesus of Nazareth threatening sedition and insurrection in Jerusalem, whose responsibility that was. And he was just trying to keep the peace. But really, he was in this uncomfortable position about trying to fit in a way, and trying to make Rome fit in. And we've all had jobs like that, haven't we? We've had tasks where we've tried to fit in, and we really haven't fitted in. I remember jobs that I had when I was first in the world of work as a young man. I trained young people in industry for an outfit that took young apprentices from places like Chelmsford and put them in the Brecon Beacons and gave them night exercises and tried to develop their characters, but I didn't really fit in with the teams there, I remember. I didn't really feel comfortable in my skin doing that job. I worked for diving teams in northeast Scotland during the oil boom, and I didn't fit in there much really either, even though my brother was a big boss up there. I wasn't really a roughy-toughy roustabout, a member of diving teams, you know, the tough blokes up there. I wasn't really that kind of person either. Again, I wasn't easy in my skin. In the end, I found journalism, and that was marvellous for me because I felt slightly at home. Because in journalism, you're not really much of a tribe in the sense that you're the tribe of journalism itself, but every newspaper didn't really feel like its own company. Of course you had an editor, and of course there was a publisher, and of course you had a boss, but you're only ever as good as your last story. You're only ever as good as your last feature or your last column. And therefore, you're a bit of a hired hand, really, so there wasn't a team to be a member of. And I think one of the great things about our Christian faith, about our church, is that we're not really a tribe. Have you noticed that? We're not really a gang that you have to fit in to. At least I hope we aren't. We're at our best when we're not that, because we're all shapes and sizes, all types. There isn't a type that is a Christian. Have you noticed that? There isn't something that you have to be a member of a church. You just have to be a member of the body of Christ. And that's any kind of person. Any kind of person that Jesus mixed with. And of course, he mixed with all sorts. With lepers, with prostitutes, with the hugely unpopular and despised tax collectors. And yes, with Roman centurions who wanted their servants healed. Remember also that he uses God's healing on a Roman guard at the moment of his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane, a story that we get to in Lent. So he's completely, he's completely prolific. He's completely loose with who he mixes with. He, in a sense, doesn't have any tribe. He has 12 sort of bodyguards in the disciples who represent the 12 tribes of Israel, 12 close guards and an inner Praetorian guard, if I can use that Greek Roman word, to look after him, those closest to him, the 12. But they're not his gang. His gang is everyone. He's completely, I'll remember the word in a minute, he's completely generous to all parties about his presence and his love. And that's what makes things so different and difficult to absorb about the new faith, the new following that is developing. It isn't like the Romans trying to go, this is what it is to be Roman. You have to have your standard in Jerusalem, to which the Jews respond, we are not having any such graven image in Jerusalem. You had to fit in with Romans. You had to fit in with Jews, however uncomfortable you might feel in your skin. And of course, there are those that couldn't fit in, and I've mentioned them already. There were the outsiders, the poor, the sinners, the Syro-Phoenicians, those who weren't Jews, those who weren't members of the Roman Empire, those outsiders that Jesus approached. And I just want us to feel what it is to be like us when we feel like outsiders, when we feel, I don't fit in here. As I say, we'll have had jobs like that, we'll have been to parties like that when we were younger, or even perhaps these days. I don't think I fit in here. Because if we ever feel that when we're at church, then we need to be reminded that this is a church that has clearly become a tribe. This is a church that has become a gang into which some people can't fit in. And that's the church's problem, not the person who doesn't feel that they fit in. Because everyone fits in the Christian faith, and that's what is so upsetting to the authorities of the day, so scandalous to the authorities of the day, so scandalous to the Roman Empire, the Roman idea of empire, to the Jewish idea of temple and the Jewish people and the law. That's why it feels such a threat. And that's why, of course, ultimately, Pontius Pilate didn't really fit in. He couldn't make Rome fit in Jerusalem because of the Jews. He didn't really fit in as a governor. He didn't fit in with Tiberius in Rome because he didn't do a good job, but he didn't fit in with the locals in Jerusalem. So he made a bit of a, if I can put it this way, a bit of a pig's ear of it all. He didn't fit in. And those times when we feel that we may not fit in relates us to that feeling of Pontius Pilate, who never really felt that he fitted in. In a sense, then, when we don't feel we fit in, we're just being Pontius Pilate's brothers and sisters again. Worth a thought. Anyway, that's our thought on Pontius Pilate for this Saturday. Tomorrow, I look forward to seeing you at St. Bart's. I've got the church right this week. I messed it up last week. Sorry, I hope I didn't send anybody to Bart's when in fact we were at All Saints. But we are at Bart's tomorrow, 8 o'clock Holy Communion and the Book of Common Prayer, and then we're celebrating Mothering Sunday at the 10 o'clock parish Eucharist at St Bart's with our guest preacher, Sarah Mackenzie, who's preaching for our Mothering Sunday. And we've tried to make the service a little more mothering friendly, if I can put it that way, celebrating the Mother of Heaven, the Blessed Virgin Mary. Feeling a bit Roman Catholic tomorrow. We've got the Magnificat, which we'll say, and we're even going to have a Hail Mary tomorrow for Mothering Sunday. Join us if you can. Look forward to seeing you there. And meanwhile, keep well, keep safe, and every blessing of Lent. Bye-bye now. God bless. Oh.